It's been an absolutely fantastic session here at the beautiful Patsall Park fishery. We've been fishing here with the Groundbait Feeder and it's been very difficult. There were times when we simply couldn't get a bite. We've had to ring the changers, and as you can see, those changers have definitely brought some fish and helped us put together this fantastic net of fish. If you'd like to see how I put this net of fish together on this difficult day, then please continue watching. Well, we're here on the bank. We've picked a location where we think it's going to give us the best place to get a few fish. We're not in the really deep water and we're not in the really shallow water. We've picked an area in the centre of the lake where it's a medium kind of depth in relation to what we've got in front of us. We're hoping we're going to be getting a few bites, and we're obviously hoping to get one or two bonus fish as well. So I'm going to get the gear out and we'll talk you through the approach, the baits and the way that we would tackle a venue like this at this time of year. Now let's talk about the all-important ground bait choice. It's an absolute minefield when we look at ground baits. And we get asked all the time why we make the choices that we make. And for me, I just keep it really, really nice and simple. A lot of ground bait is about confidence. And if you get the things that you like within mixers, then it doesn't always matter exactly what it is, as long as it's got those key features that you're looking for. Now, for me, there are two different types of ground bait, and that is fish meal and non-fish meal. And the great thing that we've got with certain ground baits and certain brands now is that a lot of them are actually marked up now, so they actually let you know if there's any fish meal in there. Now for me, as a general guideline, if I'm targeting bream, bigger fish, then I love to use fish meal. However, if I was targeting fish of all sizes and all species and I was just fishing for bites, then I would quite often go down a non-fish meal route. However, today we're fishing for a little bit of both today. We're fishing for bites, but there are lots of bream in here. And what you've got to remember is that lots and lots of fisheries these days, natural venues and commercials, see lots and lots of pellets. And that is why we tend to use fish meal mixers in the vast majority of our fishing now. Lots of these ground baits, like this one in particular, is made from crushed pellets. So that's just naturally what the fish are used to. So I'm going to be using this particular fish meal mix. This is the Method Pace Green. As the name suggests, it is designed for pace fishing, but with mixers like this, they've got some great qualities that we can use in our ground bait feeder fishing as well. So this one's quite a strong mix, but what I'm going to be doing is, because we're fishing for bites, I'm going to mix it up with this, which is one of my favourites. This is Sweet Skimmer. This is a mix that I use on places like the River Trent, on natural venues where you're just fishing for bites and you don't want to stay too exclusively on bream or the bigger fish. So what we're actually going to do is have a mix here that's got the best of both worlds. We're fishing for bites, so what we're actually doing is mixing this ground bait with this one to just make the fish meal content that little bit less strong, but as the name suggests, we're adding some sweetness to it as well. This is a nice dark green mix and this is a lighter brown mix. So we're going to have a lovely all-round mix, and this is something that we do on lots of venues, particularly if we just want to fish for bites. So I'm going to mix it 50-50. Now don't forget, with ground baits, obviously you can mix them the night before if you wish, or you can mix them on the morning. That's entirely up to you. The general guideline for that is that if you're using a ground bait which is for bigger fish, then generally we like a mix which is quite inert. Active ground bait mixers that have got lots of particles and bits coming off them can attract small fish. And if you're trying to be exclusively targeting bream and bigger fish, slower moving fish, then you don't always want the attentions of small fish. So if that's the kind of target that you've got, then you might want to mix it the night before, so it's add loads of time to soak up that water and be much more inert. Now that's the colour of the mix that we've got now. All right, that will go a little bit darker as we mix it with just lake water. As you can see, we're obviously mixing this on the morning, and lots of the matches and competitions that we fish, we tend to have quite a long time to set up. Some cases you might have an hour and a half, and that's plenty of time for a mix to actually have time to soak up all that water. And the added advantage of mixing ground baits on the day is that sometimes on certain venues, you don't always know what you're targeting. You know, there's nothing worse than mixing up a lovely bream ground bait mix the night before that might have cost you £5 for the bag, but then you get to the draw and you draw a peg where there aren't any bream there and you end up targeting roach or carp or something. So you've wasted a mix, so you end up, you know, creating another mix on the morning anyway. So that's why I like to mix my ground bait on the morning, because lots of the venues that we fish these days, you never really know what you're going to be targeting until you draw your peg. So as you can see, I've added 2 lots of water to that mix. It's gone a little bit darker. And I would normally do this as soon as I get to my peg, because then it's going to have loads and loads of time to absorb that water, because what's going to happen now over the next 30 minutes or so, that will get drier as it soaks in more water. I can add a little bit more to it to get the consistency I want. And then the all important bit is to pop it through a sieve, because all those lumps that you see there, they are bits of ground bait that's absorbed more water than the others, and we want that nice and evenly distributed. So I'm going to pop it through. I always use the finest mesh, which is the 4mm mesh, just so it's going to get all those lumps out, so it's a nice fine mix. And if you do it as soon as you get to your peg, by the time you're sieving it, your mix will be perfect, ready for the start of your session. Now let's talk about the rigs. As with most of my fishing, I'm a massive believer in keeping it super simple. And to be honest, one of the biggest problems people get with tangles and missing bites and that sort of thing is quite often because their rig is far too complicated for what they actually need it to be. So the rig that I'm going to be using today is a rig that I use on a wide variety of venues, and these are all the things that I need to create it. Okay, so the first thing that I've got, no fancy shock leaders or anything like that, just straight onto the main line, the 6-pound Horizon main line, is I'm going to slide on a snap link swivel. Really nice and durable bit of kit, moves easily on the line, because this is going to be a free running rig that you can obviously use on most venues, because just about every venue allows free running rigs. Okay, so that's just going to be free to move on the rig. And then all we're going to do is slide on one of these feeder beads, or the feeder rubber stoppers. I'll just slide one on. We're only going to be fishing up to short to medium range today, so I'll just slide one of those on. Really nice and easy. These are absolutely fantastic, purely because they're so light, which means the fish aren't going to feel it as much when they pick up your bait. And because you're sliding them onto the line, they're not actually damaging the line, so they're much better than a stot or a shot or whatever, because it means you can move it, slide it easily, and as you can see, it's not damaging the line in any way. Now, one little word of caution is, as you can see there, where I've slid that on, there's a tiny little kink there. I always like to trim that off. I'm not saying it is detrimental to the rig, but to me, I just think that might be a little bit weaker, so I always like to cut that bit off, all right? And then all we do then is, I'm actually going to be fishing with a twizzled boom. So to create that, all we really do is, so you've got your snap link swivel there, your rubber stopper there, and what I simply do is, between my finger and my thumb, is twizzle the line together. Just rub your finger and your thumb together in that action. Okay, and what that will do is it will twist the line together. As you can see, that's super stiff now. Okay, and I'll go up about 8 to 10 centimeters, trap it, and all I'll do then is simply tie it off. Like that, once, and then twice. Pull that tight. Okay, so as you can see there, we've got a nice stiff section there of what we refer to as a twizzled boom. All I do is snip that end off so your rig's nice and neat, so nothing's going to tangle. Okay, these are nice sharp braid scissors, so they're really good for this sort of thing. And then all we do then is slide that rubber stopper down to that knot. That can't slide any lower, and that is the rig. Believe it or not, how simple is that? Okay. So you've got a nice snap link swivel there that's free running. You can quickly and easily change your feeder because of the snap link there. You've just got a simple rubber stopper there, and then you've got this twizzle boom here, which will actually kick away, which I'll show you when we get fishing. That will kick away from the feeder, which will help stop you getting in tangles, and then you just attach your hook length to that loop there, loop to loop. And as you can see, with a rig like that, that's so simple, it's just so tangle free, and when you do get a bite, there's nothing there for the fish to feel. Like most anglers, I like to carry a selection of ready tied hook lengths, and because you fish, and I in particular fish so many different wide range of venues, I actually carry them in these EVA storage boxes, okay? I have separate ones for different sorts of hooks, like barbed, barbless. Today we're fishing with barbless. Now this particular container, this EVA storage box, carries 24 spools, and I tie them up in 2 different lengths, okay? So I have a particular pattern hook with a particular strength hook length tied up to 1 metre, and I also have another spool of the same hook and same line to 50 centimetres, and that's it. Quite often we have to cut them to a certain length, but by having 1 metre and 50 centimetres, that covers all of my fishing. So today I'm going to be using a size 16 MXC1, and I'm going to be kicking off with a 50 centimetre hook length, but as I mentioned, we may find that we may have to lengthen it, but we might have to shorten it. But by carrying these 2 lengths, it just gives me that option. Well, that's everything sorted. We're now ready to start thinking about some fishing. The ground bait's sorted, we've got the rigs ready. I'm really nice and comfortable, even though it's a little bit damp today. We're going to have a quick look at the choice of feeders. Now, there are loads of different choices of feeders out there in different styles, and they're all a different style and a different design for a reason. But the 2 main types that we tend to use when we're fishing with ground bait on this style of venue, it really comes into 2 categories. One is just a normal side-weighted feeder, and the other one is a distance feeder. Now today we're not going to be casting too far, so that means I'm going to be fishing with a side weighted feeder. Now these sit lovely on the bottom, okay, as the name suggests, the weight is on the side. These sit on the bottom really nice, but as the name suggests, because the weight is on the side, these aren't the ideal designs for fishing at range, okay? So this is why we've made this choice today. I'm only going to be casting about 25 metres today, and the general starting point on a venue like this, when we're fishing for bites, is to start off with a nice cage feeder like that. The reason why we start on a cage is A, because it's going to empty nice and quickly, but B, we're going to be fishing in about 6 seconds of water, you know, so you're probably looking in excess of 15, 16 feet, even more. That style feeder will allow ground bait to come out of it on the way down. So when we start a session, ideally we want to try and attract some fish into the swim, so that is the style that we would normally start on, to get some little bits of particles, some of the feed coming out of the ground bait falling through the water, where hopefully that's going to attract some fish into the swim. Now if we can continue to draw fish in and catch fish with that style of feeder, then that is what I will do. But on some occasions, like on the venue that we're on today, we might find that the fish want to be up in the water, so in that case, if that's the scenario, that is when we switch to a plastic feeder, because the plastic feeder is going to protect the ground bait from the water, and that is going to encourage the feed to only exit the feeder once it's actually down on the bottom, which is where we want them. We're fishing the feeder, that is the place where we're fishing, and if we can get fish down on the bottom, it's going to make them much easier to catch. So if that's the scenario we're faced with, we might end up fishing with a plastic feeder, but they are the choices that we can only make once we get fishing. Now if I was fishing much further out, if I was going to be fishing at range, that is when the distance feeders come in. All right, and there are 2 styles that I use. One, again, is a cage version. It's exactly the same sort of mesh as the side weighted one that we're using today. However, you can see the big difference there. All the bulk of the weight, all the weight is at the bottom, and it's shaped like that to be very aerodynamic and streamlined. So once again, that is the style that I would use if I was trying to draw some fish into the swim at long range, or if I was in shallow water. However, in deeper water, if you've still got a fish at range but in deep water, that is when I'd switch to the other Horizon one, but the one that's plastic. It's a plastic cage, and as you can see, the difference there is quite obvious. The wire mesh allows the water to get to the ground bait really, really quickly, which means it will exit much quicker from that style. However, that one, because it's not fine wire, because it's plastic, there is more of the surface area holding on to that ground bait. So that is why that style is much better if you want to fish in slightly deeper water. And once again, all the weight is at the front, making it very, very streamlined, aerodynamic, which will allow you to cast much further. So we don't need those today. We're going to be fishing at shorter range, so we've got the feeders that we're going to be using. Kick off with the wire and possibly switch to the plastic if we need to try and get the fish down on the bottom. So how did I make the decision about where we're going to fish? I always go through the same process. I always use a 30-gram bottle bomb on my rig, and what I basically do is cast it out into the swim. I'll cast it into different areas, and with a stopwatch I just time how long it takes that bomb to hit the bottom. by doing that, you're actually mapping out the swim, and it can give you a great idea about any deeper areas, any shallower areas, any drop-offs, and it will also highlight snags as well, which is something that's very important. I've already done that. I found a nice spot at 25 metres. It's in about 6 seconds of water, and I think that's where we're going to kick off. It's not too deep, it's not too shallow, and we're going to kick off with that wire cage feeder, get some bait falling through the water where hopefully we're going to draw some fish into the swim, and if we can do that, hopefully we're going to catch them. So I can't wait to get some bait out there. So I'm going to put 3 or 4 feederfuls out there just to kickstart the swim, then put a hook length on, and we'll see if there's any fish out there waiting for us. Well, I put 4 feederfuls of bait out there. Not with loads of feed, because we don't know how many fish are out there, and it's always best to ease your way into a session like this. And I've just had a couple of sucked pinkies, so it's telling us that there's 1 or 2 fish out there. But when it's early on in a session like this, you know, you're just kind of feeling your way into it, because obviously you can always feed to the bites that you're getting, you know. Feed a little bit, get some bites, and if there are more fish there than what you actually thought, then obviously you can just start feeding more. So you're actually feeding to your bites. And as you know, I'm only fishing 25 metres, and because of that, I'm just fishing the Horizon Pro Slim, which is a fantastic rod for this sort of fishing. You know, it's a lovely soft rod. I use it for small fish, roach, perch, but it's great for, you know, skimmers and big bream as well. So when you're fishing up to that sort of 30 metre sort of range, I just use the 11 foot, which is ideal. You know, it's a lovely rod. I've got that coupled with a 1 ounce tip. Like I say, we're not fighting the wind today, and at that short range, you don't need a stiff tip to get out there, you know, and a 1 ounce tip is going to show up all those little indications, what we're hopefully going to be getting from roach. Oh, if that was a little indication then. There was nothing there. So, because this is only 11 foot rod, I've coupled that with the Horizon 3000 reel. Now there's no sign on that bait. It's just coupled really nice with it. It's a really nice balance. So it's just a case of just keep dropping that feeder in, getting some bait falling through the water, trying to draw fish in. And then if you can start getting indications and bites, then hopefully you want to start trying to convert those indications into fish in the net. So this rod's ideal for fishing this sort of range. However, if I was faced with a peg or a swim where I felt the fish were a little bit further out, then all we do is when we're fishing further than that, I would just step up the rod, the length of the rod. I would switch to a 12 foot. Well, it's 3.6 metre, 11 foot 10. It's the X class, the Horizon Pro X class. That again, it's a lovely quite soft rod, but you can still fish at that sort of 50 metre range. So that is the rod that I would be using if I was targeting that open water further out. But I'm quite confident that the fish are going to be on this short line. Well, as we expected, or half expected, the plastic feeder seems to be better. Just switched to that open-ended plastic feeder like we mentioned earlier, and I've just had a couple of little indications. Definitely felt better. Oh, we've got a perch. How about that? So there we go. So we don't know if that's coincidence or not. We don't. But as with many things in fishing, we just have to remember that sometimes little changes can make a big difference. Beautiful little perch. It's great fishing with baits like this, with pinkies and maggots. You never know what you're going to hook, do you? But so that could be a coincidence. But whatever the reason, it's resulted in a fish, and it just feels a little bit more positive, because obviously the bait is only emptying right down on the bottom now. So if there are fish up in the water, high in, you know, up in the higher surface layers, or going higher off the bottom, you know, with a feeder like this, it's only going to empty on the bottom. So you're kind of forcing the fish down, because if they want the bait, they're going to have to go down for it, and that's right where your hook bait is. So let's hope that is the reason. but obviously we'll find out over the next few casts. Well, is it coincidence? I don't know. But we've just gone in and I've decided to just have a steadier cast. And I got a bite. And we just had a little skimmer, an immaculate little skimmer. And this has been out there probably 5 minutes. And this feels a much better fish. It could be a big skimmer or even a bream. Again on double pinky. And if it is, well, it's definitely a fish. So that'll be 3 fish in 3 casts since switching to that plastic feeder. There we go. Fantastic. Well, is that too much of a coincidence? I'd like to think that we've just found a better way of feeding the peg. Look at that beautiful fish. Freezing cold, it really is cold, but it's quite deep out there. Well, that's fantastic. So that's 3 fish that we've had now. Whoa, he's still lively. 3 fish we've had since we changed that feeder. And like I said before, that's why we carry different feeders for different jobs, you know, and that's why there's so many different styles out there. So even if you're confident there are a few fish there, sometimes just by changing the design of the feeder can transform your swim, and it's looking like that's what's happened today. Well, we've cast in again, and that was probably the best bite we've had so far. Really fast bite, really positive. Double pinky again. Just putting 4 or 5 pinkies in that plastic feeder, and that's only been in there a couple of minutes, if that, and we're into another fish. Now, I don't know what this one is. Could be a roach or a perch. I'll be amazed if it's a skimmer bite, and it is. You never would have thought that was a skimmer with that bite then. It just ran, it just completely ran. So positive. So that's 4 in 4 casts. We haven't changed the mix, we haven't changed the feed, we haven't changed the hook bait even. All we've changed is that feeder. That's a beautiful skimmer. Fantastic condition. Who would have thought just changing your feeder would transform your swim so blatantly, but as long as you remember that those little changes can make a difference. So there were some fish out there. All the time we were wondering if there were even any fish there, but that's obviously proving that there are. Well, that was a cheeky little bite, one where you couldn't quite tell if it was on or not, but I picked up and it's on, back to the roach. So that's 5 in 5 casts. Different species. He's unhooked himself. There we go. So that's it. We've got a few fish there feeding now, which is great. You know, we're not only getting bites now, but we're actually catching fish. And we can just enjoy catching those. Obviously, if we want, in a while, we could put a slightly bigger bait on, just to see if we can get a bigger fish. But to be quite honest, on sessions like this, when it is still cold, the water's cold, we're just coming into springtime, it's nice getting a few bites, and it's nice not knowing what you're going to hook next. Well, it's gone quiet. This can often happen. We've had 6 fish in about 7 casts, which was obviously a nice little spell, but I've just had about 3 or 4 casts now without a bite. So rather than just get despondent with it, rather than just sit there, I'm going to go back to the beginning. This is something that we quite often have to do in deep water. So all I'm going to do is basically unclip that plastic feeder and go back to the cage feeder that we started on. All right. And the reason why I'm doing that is because once again, I'm going to try and attract some fish back into the swim. We don't know where they've gone. There are some grebes out there that are diving and possibly moving the fish around. There are pike in here as well. So that could be the reason. But obviously we don't just want to sit here. So what I'm going to do is go back to the cage, a few pinkies in, So what this is going to do again, just like at the beginning, get some bait falling off that feeder, hoping to try and draw some fish back into the spot. And if we can get 1 or 2 bites doing that, that'll be great. And if not, all I'll do is go back to the plastic once we've attracted some fish into the swim, and then try and focus them back down on the bottom again. It's just about constantly ringing the changes, about being aware what's happening, you know, and what's happening in your swim. Don't forget when you're feeder fishing, and this is a really important thing that a lot of people kind of forget, is that yes, we're fishing 25 metres out, but there might be fish on that line. There might be fish 25 metres out, but there could be 20 feet of water above your feeder as well, you know, and that might be where the fish are, up above your feeder. We know that fish don't live on the bottom, so they could constantly be moving about. And by having different styles of feeder, thinking about what's happening in your swim, it can help you stay in touch with the fish. So we're going to have a couple of casts with this cage feeder, see if we can get some fish back in the swim, and hopefully we'll get some fish back down on the bottom right where we're fishing. Well, that's 3 casts now with the cage feeder, and that's 3 bites from nowhere. I think it's another roach, but this is what can happen when you know, you've got your bait, the ground bait coming out of the feeder on the way down. Obviously you'd expect roach like that to be up in the water, especially when you're fishing with pinkies. It's just a case of constantly monitoring your swim. Either disgorger on that one, another little roach. But it's nice when there are things that you can do to just keep bites coming, you know. On cold days like this, it's just nice to be getting bites. And as you've seen already, even fishing like this, when you think it might just be a small fish approach, as you saw earlier, it can also obviously catch a bonus fish as well as they come into the peg. Well, we've just had a little bit of an iffy spell. I don't really know why it went dead. We went back to a cage feeder and it didn't really work. Not as well as it did earlier on. So to just mix it up again, we went back to a plastic feeder and just started putting about 15 to 20 pinkies in each cast, which is a lot more than I've been feeding. And within 2 casts, we got a roach, then I got another roach, and then another roach. And now we've just hooked into something else now, which feels like a bream. And it is. Let's see if we can get him. There we go. Well, have we not been feeding quite enough? I don't know. But like I said right at the start, feeling your way into sessions is that by far, if you don't know how it's going to fish, or you don't know the venue, it can be the best way to go, because if it is going to be hard, then you're not feeding too much if you're only after half a dozen bites. But if you do start getting more bites than you expected, well, you can just start feeding more in response to the number of fish that are there, if that makes sense. So anyway, whatever the reason, that's another lovely fish, you know. And that's 4 fish in 4 casts now since feeding, stepping up the bait, stepping up the amount of freebies that we're putting in. So let's see if that continues. Caught that one just on a single live maggot, tipped off with a pinky. But we're still only really just putting pinkies through. So there we go. Fantastic fish. Well, it looks like just pushing the peg a little bit with that extra feed has had a positive response. Not getting many bites, I'll be absolutely honest with you, and there aren't loads of those little roach there. It was nice catching those little roach earlier, but now, even though I'm feeding quite a lot of pinkies, they're not attacking it like I thought they would do. But now when I do get a bite, it seems to be a slightly better fish. We've just had a couple of casts with tiny indications. I think there may have been liners, and then this has literally only been in about a minute, and we've got another nice skimmer. So they are responding to that extra feed. However, it could be the time of day as well, you know, and that's why I said earlier about feeling your way into it, and then as the session progresses, you can up your feed accordingly, you know. And sometimes the last hour at this time of year can be your best time for catching bonus fish, and it looks like that's what's happening now. Not massive fish, but every bit of a bonus fish, certainly when you're fishing for silverfish on these deeper still waters at this time of year when the water's still cold. So it just shows you, even when you are catching little roach, that even with a nice balanced setup like this with pinkies and small baits, you can still catch those bonus fish in between the bites from roach. Well, that's been a really enjoyable session. It just shows that sometimes you've got to keep bringing the changes in order to keep fish coming. We really hope you've enjoyed this session as much as what we have. We've got lots more sessions like this being filmed this year right here on this Matrix YouTube channel, so keep checking back to stay in touch with all our videos. So thanks for watching, really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you next time.